Yesterday, Venerable Chuni gave a talk about how monastics relate to food and requisites. And she quoted Venerable Master Wu Yin in her book, Choosing Simplicity, about the attitudes that going on alms round engenders in the monastic. And one of those is overcoming the arrogance of independence. And this is something that really resonated with me. It's been a theme of my life, maybe, trying to become fully independent, not having to rely on anybody. It's part of the American culture. We're encouraged to be self-sufficient and to be able to do everything ourselves, not to be reliant on the government, to be a burden to others, to really contribute as much as possible and to not rely on others to meet our needs. And so the D word had become quite dirty for me, the dependence word. But coming to Buddhism, it's all about dependence. We just heard a teaching from Geshe Tabke about how to really understand reality, how to see things as they are. It requires acknowledging interdependence, how all things are dependent on their causes and conditions for their existence. And it's taken some time to become comfortable with the idea that I am not contributing to society in the way that I used to. I had an experience. It was about a year after I ordained, or maybe less than a year. I traveled with some other nuns to a Western monastics gathering in California. And on the way back, I took a walk in one of the airports that we were, I think it was Seattle. And I remember just standing in the middle of this big hallway in between terminals. And people were just flowing by me, around me. And I had this very acute feeling of not knowing who I was. I was in my robes. I wanted to buy water and a snack, but I couldn't. Trying to keep my precepts about handling money. People were not looking at me strangely, but a few people were a little bit interested. And this was a fear I'd had before ordaining. How would I relate being out in public, people looking at me maybe in a not so kind way or a curious way? And so I was living that in the moment. But what really was going on for me was not how other people were relating to me, but how was I relating to them? And it felt very strange to not be able to go out and buy something. How could I contribute to the economy? How could I give back to my fellow Americans if I'm not earning a wage and paying taxes and, consuming, shopping? Who was I without a career? How could I connect to people? How could I express what's my value? What's my ability to be of service to others? I don't have a home, my own personal home. That's a bit odd. And yeah, I don't have much of a style anymore, my own personal identity. And it was very disorienting. So it wasn't pleasant. And I had almost a little nervous breakdown. And thankfully, the other nuns were there to comfort me through that. But I came out the other end, I think, much stronger, with a much clearer vision of what it means to be a monastic and what it means to have those roles. And going back to this feeling of wanting to be independent, I think the Buddha's life story fed into that ideal, that fantasy that I had. He just left his family, he left the palace, he threw off all his clothes, he shaved his hair, and he went to live in the woods. And then he sat and he meditated, and boom, all by himself, he attained awakening. But actually, there's a lot. A lot of people helped him from the moment he left the palace until he reached awakening. He moved in with some other ascetics, and he learned all their meditation practices. He had teachers, he had communities. They invited him to lead the community. He had stopped eating, or he ate very little for quite a while, in keeping with the ascetic practices that he was using to achieve liberation, which didn't work. But on the right before his liberation, there was a young girl who gave him a bowl of porridge. And that helped him regain his strength and to be able to gain insight into reality and to go on to become the Buddha. So without that girl, who actually thought he was a tree spirit, and without her generosity, without that bowl of porridge, without the farmers who grew the rice, and without whoever obtained the water to produce the rice, and all of that went into it, there would be no Buddha. And likewise, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, without the Tibetan society, without the Tibetan culture, there would be no Dalai Lama. Someone made a point that it's all the merit combined of the Tibetan people and all other human beings that have allowed someone like His Holiness to be present in the world. We each contribute to the creation of Buddhas, and if we don't have the merit for it, we're not going to meet a Buddha. So thankfully, we all have very good merit. And the point is that even Buddhas are dependent arisings. The Buddha had a teacher of his own. He learned the Dharma from previous Buddhas. So this idea that he just did it by himself, it's sort of, I'm really trying to pick that apart. And there's no other way to really learn just how dependent we are than living in community. Everything, all the decisions that I make throughout the day always have the community in mind. What are the effects going to be on others? What are the effects going to be both now and down the line? And also being dependent on offerings, on alms. That's quite something, to be completely dependent on the kindness of others. And you can't escape from that fact as a monastic. You definitely can escape from that fact as a layperson, because this is what I did. And actually, we're always dependent on one another for everything that we have, but it's just become so much more obvious as a monastic. And so this fact of dependence, it's not only the truth, but it can also be quite beautiful, actually, if we learn to embrace it. And if we learn to recognize that we're all supporting one another, we're all in this together. There's really no fine line between me and others, us and them. And it's this kind of view, I think, that really can lead to strong bodhicitta, wanting to repay the kindness of others, recognizing that by helping others, I'm helping myself. And by practicing the Dharma and transforming my mind, I'm also helping others. So I just wanted to share these reflections on dependence and how it doesn't have to be a scary thing. It was a very scary thing for me most of my life. It can be a wonderful thing. And if anything else, it's the truth. So may we not be afraid to rely on one another for our well-being, both material and spiritual, because we do depend on other beings. We depend on other beings to become a Buddha.